Welcome to the Tough Fish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Michael Webb. Michael, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Jen. I'm excited to be here.
I'm so glad you are, and I would love for you to start with how'd you get into writing?
Oh well, almost 3 years ago now. I it's kind of like I've always been a big reader, but never writing. To be honest, I hated writing growing up. Like high school assignments, college assignments, I ran as far as I could to avoid them. I hated the idea, the act of it, which is kind of crazy. But I've always loved reading. And as I grew older, I got more and more to reading fantasy, thrillers, young adult, some mystery, some variety of genres I got into. But the one thing that struck me was that moment when you're reading a book and there's some maybe a character that you love or a plot piece that's like, oh, that's amazing. Like I love how the author brought that around, and you're like you're sitting reading a book, but you're cheering for someone, and like my face is like grinning because of what I'm reading in the story. I love that feeling. And so about 3 years ago, I started mulling around the idea that would be cool to create my own story like that. Because I know what I like. I know when I read a book, I'm like, oh, that was awesome. That was amazing. And like I think I could do that. I think I could come up with my own story that incorporates some of those and build something that I can share with others. So it kind of started as an idea, and I'm very much a self motivated go getter type of guy. Like if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go do it. Running, I was into running. I was like, I want to run a marathon one day. Like, all right, let's sign up for that one. Let's do a training plan, and boom, marathon is done. That's kind of my personality: is setting a goal, having a plan, and doing it. So I came up with a goal of I want to write a novel. Never written anything before, like literally never written anything before. Don't know how it works, don't know if it would be good at all, don't know anything about the editing process, the publishing process. I just thought, I'll write a novel. I don't know how I'll put it together. I'll probably sell a handful of copies to friends and family, and that'll be it. So that's how I started. But I really didn't know if it would be any good at all. So when I first started, I was sitting at a restaurant, had my laptop up, and I just started putting together some like a first chapter, just throwing down some ideas. All right, they start here, they're doing this. I had no planning whatsoever. Just dropped down in a scene, threw some characters' names on there, started with the plot, and I wrote over that day and the next. I wrote the first chapter. I'm like, all right, let's read this. How bad is this? Was basically what I was wondering. And I read it back. I'm like, it's not too bad. It's it's not. It needs some polish. It needs some work, but I think I could do this. So that's what really fully formed the idea of okay, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to write it, and it's going to be 500-page novel, and it's going to be this big thing, story, complete story, beginning to end. So I really dove in head first. I had no idea how much work it was going to be. I'm glad that I didn't. Otherwise, it might have been a little more daunting. I may not have taken that first step, but getting into it was cool because what I quickly found was I absolutely loved the story creation process, building the characters, building the plot, the world, the twists and turns, the action scenes, the disappointments, the victories. It's so much fun writing that. So I decided I fell in love with writing. And even before I had published the first book, I already decided I was going to start with second. I was going to keep going because I had fallen in love with it. So the what was really interesting after that first draft, because that was my initial goal was I want to write a novel. And in my mind, it was I put the story out there, and it is one draft. I maybe clean it up a little bit, but then it's done. I didn't realize I wasn't even close to done at that point. I went back and edited it myself, and then luckily I took some time to do research of what comes next. if you're going to really publish a book, which as I've put more and more hours into writing, I realize if I'm going to put this much effort into writing a story, I might as well make it good. So what does it take to take a rough draft and make it good? Like if I go into Barnes and Noble and see books on a shelf, how can I get my books to stand up against those books? So what needs to happen? And that's when I dug into all the different types of editing that are out there. I learned about alpha readers or beta readers. I learned about story creation, how you can create urgency in the story, have goals, have characters that have character arcs as they change over the course of the story. I learned about teasing an event, but then holding back and bringing it back later in the story. I learned about active voice and versus passive voice, showing versus telling. So all these things were a steady process that I learned from books and podcasts and other writers. I spent a lot of time on Facebook, different Facebook groups, looking for advice about writing and how it works and how do you make a story great. And then every time I would learn something, it'd be like, all right, I got to rewrite everything now. So I would go back to my draft and I would edit it myself and then I would edit it again and okay, I need to incorporate this. So let's add a chapter here and this is bad. Let's cut this chapter and lots and lots of back and forth of trying to trim it up, make it to where it feels like a legit book. So that first book took a lot of time. It was about 18 months from when I first started writing to when I finally got it published. But I really needed that time because I had no idea what I was doing. And
So let's hit on a few things here.
yeah,
So first off, I love the fact that you know, set out to try something, look at it, and then kept going with it. And to your point, you learned a lot about the craft and the different
mhm,
elements of it that bring a book, bring a story together. But it sounded like you sort of started with the plot first and then built the characters out from that. Is that the way it worked for you, or did you think through your characters first and then let the plot evolve because the characters were working, showing themselves more to you, and then they're bumping up against it and going, "Oh
right.
no, I'm not doing that."
Right. It was definitely some of that. I tried to have a little foresight into what will this character be like. But what I found was funny is as I wrote the story and I get to the end of the story, I'm like, wait a second, like this is not that person. Like I even wrote up a sheet of here's their personality, this is what they're like, and I get to the end of the book, I'm like, I didn't do that at all. Like that just it didn't pan out. In some ways, I had to go back and change because I wasn't being very close sticking to my plan. I just kind of went here, there, and everywhere, not knowing where I was going. So that first book was very much I was a pantser. I was writing from the seat of my pants, figuring out where I went as I went. But I didn't always like where I ended up. So it took a lot of rewrites. So the character piece, some of it was, all right, what's this character like? You know what? I don't think he should be like that. At this point in the story, he needs to be more this way. So I would go back and edit it again. And I'll find another character like, yeah, this character is not coming off the way I intended. You know what? I need to edit them again or add more scenes with them to bring out some aspect of it. Since that first book, I've gotten a lot more organized. So before I start writing, I have a much better outline of character personalities and descriptions and their arc and what they're doing and the plot as well. I have a much better idea of where am I going. Not necessarily every scene, but key moments of the book. So then I will write to get to the next moment, to get to the next moment, which really helps me make sure I end up in a place that matches what I want.
Very cool. Very, very cool. Because, I love how you said, like, you get to the end and then the characters kind of going, almost like they're sitting there with you in the room going, "Really? This just how did this happen to us?" type
Yeah.
of thing. And you're like, "Okay, well, let's go back." So when you were working through that and you were blending different elements to your point of things that you liked. So I know young
Mhm,
adult, I know fantasy and
mhm.
the thriller elements to it as well. How did you blend all of the genres so that it felt like a story that really you could get behind, and you kind of
Mm,
had an idea of how you would best position it when you're talking about it, because when you're blending the genres in such a way,
sure.
sometimes that can be a little it's a cool idea, but then it can be a little difficult of, well, now how do I
How do you
position this?
market
How
it?
do I
Right.
put it out
Yeah.
there?
When someone says, "What's your book about?" Like, how do you do that? I have found that it's been a challenge in some ways. When I as I learn more about writing, I when I approach future books, I almost want to answer that question at the beginning and then write the story around what is this book about. You know, it's like what's the hook, and decide the hook before you even plan out the story. And for my first book, or for my first the trilogy, I'm the reverse of that. So I'm like, okay, I wrote this story, and now what is it? How do I sell it? So what I did was, I like I like fantasy. That's my favorite genre, the medieval traditional fantasy setting. But I also like young adult. I like books that are accessible to younger audiences.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to write for younger audiences. I didn't want to write it specifically because there's some young adult books, you read them and they're campy, the conversations are more silly, and they are specifically trying to reach middle school age or high school age, or even later elementary age. With the humor of the book is more young adult humor. So what I specifically tried to do was, I wrote a book for adults. The story, the themes, they are things that adults can relate to. Not that they're adult content, but they're relatable to adults. But I made the content appropriate enough to where young adult readers could still enjoy it. And what I found, that it's been a great mixture, because kids as young as 9 to people as old as 88 have come back saying, I absolutely have fallen in love with your book. I love your character. I love the plot. It's a breath of fresh air. And so it's been a nice mixture of this young adult slash adult audience. And it's not fantasy as in Lord of the Rings. It's not dragons and wizards and elves. It's more a realistic world in a medieval setting, but it has fantasy elements to it, maybe some special powers, if you will, that kind of add that fantasy piece. Made up world, made up animals and plants and stuff like that. But it's not what you would I wouldn't consider it high fantasy. It's more realistic fantasy, and I found there's a great market for it. Every once in a while, I run into readers who will stumble across it. They'll find it on Amazon, and they'll say, "This wasn't what I was looking for." They were maybe looking for that high fantasy, like an adult novel, or some people. Someone said they were looking for a grim dark, like a really gritty type of book, and they were disappointed because it wasn't that. So I think in some ways, I maybe could have done that better. That it's important to market your book and to present it, the cover, the title, the description, everything, as this is a young adult epic fantasy book. And if you like that genre, then you're going to like this book. And every once in a while, I get people in that doesn't quite match that. Most of the time, they still enjoy it, but I find some exceptions to that.
Okay, you've touched on a couple of things I really want to make sure we talk about. One of which is, so to your point, you were creating a world, but you had an idea of what you wanted it to be, but how did you keep all of the elements straight? I mean, did you have a spreadsheet that you were working to have everything lined up, or how did you
I
keep all of
always have
those parts?
spreadsheets.
How did you keep that moving?
Yeah. So a couple different ways. I write in Scrivener, so I keep track of all my stuff in like a document, characters' names, descriptions in there. I drew a map of the world. That was really helpful. That it's printed out, but then I worked it into the computer. It's actually in the books with all the geography, because I like knowing the world, where the mountains, the rivers, the trees, because that informs your story. To be able to figure out, okay, we're traveling this direction. What are we going? Oh, we're going to cross the river. All right, let's throw that in the story. Um, but then I kept a notebook of world elements. Some people would call it like a world Bible or something. It's anytime I create a new animal, I would write it down in there, or fruit, or meat. What types of plants are they? Medicines. What medicines did they use? So I would make a note of something I either made up, or a real world thing, like they eat meat, they eat cows, they eat pork, they eat chicken. So I would add that into my food section of what do people eat. And then I would throw in something random like verquash, which is like a vegetable. It's like this purple, kind of like a squash versus zucchini versus eggplant. So that's in the story, but it's made up. And so I'll have these aspects of things that are invented, and I just write them down. And then later on in the book, I'm like, okay, I need a food here. Let's see. Yeah, let's throw the bolo fruit back in, to reference it again. So anytime I make up something, I'll try to jot it down somewhere, because I found as I got farther and farther along, the final trilogy is around 400 pages long. I find it's very difficult to remember what were all those things I built and made up, invented way back when. So those sheets really help me stay organized.
Absolutely, absolutely. The other thing that I really wanted to touch on that you said just previous to that was about the response. That
Hmm,
as part of it was the response with, how do people understand the positioning, how to communicate it when they're blending genres in particular, but still
mhm,
it sounds like you did a wonderful job for people to really get a feel for it, especially with such an awesome age range to be excited about
yeah.
it. So this is amazing. I'm enjoying it. Fresh air. So,
Yeah.
what was the response like, and how did you kind of work through that?
Yeah, that's been the most fun part of the whole process for me. At first, it was I want to write a book. I'll sell a few copies to friends and family. Eventually, I set a goal of I wanted to sell 500 copies, which I thought, okay, if I sell 500 copies, maybe I'll make back my money, like editing costs, cover design costs. So that was kind of my goal going into it. But I had no clue. Am I going to sell 50? Am I going to sell 1,000? I don't know. And once I put the book out there, the feedback I started getting from, at first it's friends and family, because those are the only people who know me, the only people who are going to buy it. And it was really good. But when your mother tells you that it's great, I mean, is she wrong? Not necessarily, but you can't necessarily count on that when it's someone who's close. But I kept getting more and more feedback. It was really positive. Like people going out of their way to note how impressed or surprised they were, because they first say, Michael Webb wrote a book. Sure, I'll read it. Holy cow! Like while they're reading it, they forget that it was written by me, and they're just enjoying it for the book that it is. But what really impressed me was about a month and a half in that I really reached a turning point. I got the book out. No one knows who I am at all. I have no name recognition, but it starts to sell, and I get reviews, and people start to tell other people, and it grows and grows. So about a month and a half in, I see the sales start to tick up. And I'm like, holy cow, this is crazy. And I would get reviews back from someone in the UK, someone in Australia, someone in California that I don't know who they are. First time I saw reviews from names I didn't recognize, that was a cool moment, because they found it somehow. I have no idea how. And they're leaving these glowing reviews like, this book really got me back into reading. It was a breath of fresh air. One person told me that I'm now their new favorite author, and they read like 30 books a year. One girl told me she's dressing up to be a Shadow Knight for Halloween this year because she enjoys my book so much. Um, so the sales kind of kept going up and up, and eventually it kind of became something of its own on Amazon, to where now that Amazon know it's a sellable book, it starts putting it out on also bots, when you're on Amazon, or when they send out promotional emails. Here's a book we think you may enjoy, and they would advertise for me. And then the reviews blew me away, like, because I expected, in my mind, if I'm going to write a book, I'm not a writer, so it's probably going to be okay. That was what I expected going in. Maybe just above okay. But the feedback I get is the majority are 5-star reviews from people who don't know me, and they're just picking up a book to read it. You go to Barnes and Noble, you pick up a book, you expect it to be awesome because it is a professionally written book. And that's what people were saying about my book, which was mind blowing. And then it just kind of kept going and going and going. And then I published book two, and it was even more. And I just recently published book three. Now I have the whole series out. And my original goal of 500 copies, I just passed 45,000 across all three books. Yeah.
That is
Um,
awesome.
yeah, so that's been very exciting. It's really changed my perspective about writing in general. Is it's not just a bucket list idea of all right, check that off and move on. It's something that I I've grown passionate about and I love it. And now I have this audience of people out there. I publish a book and they read it in 2 days and they contact me saying, "That was amazing. I love it. When's the next book coming out?" I'm like, "Give me a break." Like, do you know how long it took me to write that? So that's my hope now is to keep putting out books. I've got, several more that I'm working on now in hopes of continuing to get a backlist of more books. But yeah, the response overall has been the biggest surprise for me, because you don't know what it's like when you're doing it yourself. You need people to validate it. So hearing from complete strangers who have no idea who they are saying that they absolutely love it, just blows my mind, and it never gets old.
So let me ask you a question off of that because I think that that is absolutely wonderful that you have received such glowing feedback, especially to your point when it's unsolicited from people you
Right.
don't know. There's just something really amazing that happens because you just realize I really touched somebody and that feels so good. And the other thing is, what would you offer to writers who are aspiring to be in that space? What type of encouragement or tips would you give them so that they can ultimately reach a goal like
Mhm.
that too?
Yeah, for me, I've had that question a lot because a lot of writers will come to me saying, "What did you do? What is your secret? What's the formula?" That's what everyone wants to know. Is what's the formula so I can repeat that and do it myself? And I kind of break it down to two areas. One is it has to be a good story. No matter what you do down the road, if the story is not good, all of your efforts will eventually fall flat because you can do ads, you can market, you can get so much publicity, but then if you're getting 2 3 star reviews, or 3 to 4 star reviews even on Amazon, then and the reviews are mediocre, no one's going to be telling their friends, "Hey, I just read this book, you should check it out," because they're not excited about it. And Amazon's not going to try to promote it because they see, hey, it's not doing so well. So that goes back to the craft of writing. What is it that people like about stories? There's a The approach I took when I was creating it was, what do I enjoy in a book? I mentioned that earlier. When I first started, before I started creating the story, was what gets me excited about reading a book? Like The Name of the Wind is my favorite book of all time by Patrick Rothfuss. And I thought, what do I love about that book? I pick out certain scenes. Like, I love that scene because the character did this. And I love this scene because this is what happened here. So I wrote down this sheet of paper of about 8 different things that I absolutely love. I'm like, okay, how can I incorporate that feeling into my book? And that was the plotting I did from the beginning. I said I did a lot of pants writing, but I did plot out, I want a moment where this happens. And I want a scene where this happens. And I think that's what really resonates with readers is they get those moments. And I tried, I build up the characters and the scenes, and you get to the boom. This is the where the hammer gets dropped, and you want that emotional response of, oh, I can't believe that happened to the character, or you're cheering for them and they had a victory and you celebrate it with them. That's what gets the readers excited when they finish the book and they want to tell people because they had those cool moments. So that's part of the advice is make sure your book connects with readers. You're not just telling a story, point A to point B, blah, blah, blah. I don't care about the characters. I just see what they did. They have to be invested in your characters. They have to be excited about the story you're telling. They need to be emotionally moved in some way. You're not relating information, you are creating emotions in your readers. And you want that emotional journey to be something they appreciate being on. So that's part one. You have to have that in your story. Otherwise, anything else you do is going to fall flat. And the second is you have to work your tail off to market it. And that's something that I think that I put a lot of effort, a lot of creative ideas into how do I get the word out because I am a no name. Nobody has any idea who Michael Webb is. So I made sure, how can I do that? What are the free avenues I can do that? What are the ones where I can pay to get the word out within reason to get a hopefully a better return on that? But I really focused a lot because I'm brand new and I don't know if anything's going to sell. What can I do for free or very low cost to get the word out? Very first thing, this was definitely not low cost, but I emphasize to any author is invest in a good cover, because if you have a bad cover, you will not get readers. I will not buy a book with a cheesy looking cover. I instantly assume the quality of the book is not good. So I invested a lot into a illustrated, professionally created cover. And that's probably one of the best initial feedbacks I get anytime I'm sharing it somewhere is, holy cow, that cover looks amazing. And what that does is it draws them in, and now they're reading the description of the book, and now they might potentially buy it. But without that good cover, I think a big portion of my success would not have been there without the book cover I had. And that costs money. It doesn't have to cost a ton of money, but it almost 99% of the time, you will not have a good cover unless you have some sort of investment in it. And that is on the marketing side. That is getting the word out. It has to look attractive.
Absolutely. Michael, this has been awesome. Where can people
Mhm.
connect with you and where can they get your books?
So you can connect with me. I'm on social media on Instagram and Facebook. My handle is Michael Webb Novels. So connect there. I'm always posting behind the scenes. What am I writing? What's being published? What's being said about the books? Kind of a the look at where I'm at. My website is michaelwebbnovels.com. I have information about books, upcoming books. I have Michael Webb MWN Select, which is my exclusive readers group. Pictures and other updates are on there. But my books are on Amazon. There are some other places, but primarily on Amazon. An ebook, paperback, hardback, audiobook on Audible. The third book is coming out on audiobook in should be the end of November, but the rest of them are all out there. So yeah, I'd love to hear from anybody. You can connect with me from my website or anywhere on social media. And if anyone's interested in a great young adult epic fantasy trilogy, check out the Shadow Knights Trilogy. The Last Shadow Knight is the first book in it, and I think it's something you'll enjoy.
Thank you so much, Michael. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.